and there may be an infinite number of them, all have slightly different laws of nature, slightly different fine-tuned, not so fine-tuned, terribly tuned for life, and so on. All the ones that are terribly tuned and not so fine-tuned won't give rise to life. Any of them that are like ours, and if there's enough of them, and if there's an infinite number of them, that's enough, any of them that are like ours may give rise to sentient beings like us who ask the question, where did we come from? That's one answer. It may be wrong, but if it's wrong, it doesn't make the God hypothesis right. It just means we don't know yet. Next slide. So, continuing on the design thing. The question is, what made the whale's flipper? This is just one of hundreds of examples I could use. The whale's flipper has this pretty nifty design for cutting through the water. The whole body of the whale is a fusiform body. The head doesn't have a neck and shoulders. They just all blend together for cruising through the water. It's hydrodynamic instead of aerodynamic. But if you actually take the skin off, you see what the flipper looks like. It looks like your arm. Now, why would an intelligent designer design a not so intelligently looking flipper? In fact, it looks like our flipper, except we don't have a flipper, we have an arm. The answer is because a top-down designer didn't build it. A bottom-up tinkerer called evolution did. Next slide. So, for example, if humans were designed by God, we might look something like this. To alleviate the lower back problems, we have more vertebrae that are thicker. To alleviate the problems of blood flow in the legs and blood collection in the legs, you have stronger veins and more valves. You have much larger buttock muscles here to hold this upper thing. Your ears would be slightly different, and so on. The arms would be shorter. The rib cage would be larger to hold the organs. The point is this. Yes, it looks like design has happened, but is it really intelligent design? Does it look like a omniscient, omnipotent being really made us with all the little flaws in our design? Next slide. Another question, evolution or God or intelligent designer. We have two different hypotheses here. Dr. Hovind, God, and Kyle, intelligent designer, id, whoever it is. The question is, let's just say, just take this one sequence of the evolution of the ceratopsians, like the Triceratops, the most famous little three-horned dinosaur, Triceratops. Where'd it come from? Okay, regardless of whether the picture is right or not, it's roughly right, because we have quite a few fossils here. When did id, or God, interject his influence? Did he just create the general form and then evolution created all the other forms? Or did id, God, interject at each of the family level, or at the genus level, or at the species level? When does God intervene when he's intervening? At every single individual born, is God tweaking the system? You will not find consensus among creationists on this question. It's very interesting that they dissent among themselves about how often and when God intervenes. Anything from he set the whole system up at the beginning and stepped out and just let it run by itself, to he tweaks every single little molecule and genome in every single one of us that is born, and everything in between. Next slide. So, how do we know evolutionary theory is true? It's not true, capital T, true in a religious sense. It's not true in a political sense. Not true in a legal sense. You've heard two legal metaphors tonight. This is the wrong metaphor. Science is not the law. It's a different way of thinking completely. This is why when lawyers try to do science and scientists try to do law, they get messed up. They shouldn't do that. There's different ways of thinking. Science traffics in fine shades of gray, with probabilities of being more closer to truth or less closer to truth. But there is no capital T truth. However, we are confident that it's provisionally true. That is, could be wrong. We'll see. But it gives a coherent explanation of what we know. It's consilient. That is, independent lines of inquiry all jump to the same conclusion. And it predicts new findings which so far have been confirmed empirically. For example, next slide. Just on the age of the Earth question, I just threw this in the limo driving over here typing because I realized we were supposed to discuss the age of the Earth. I mean, how do we know how old the Earth is? A bunch of different ways. Potassium-argon dating. There's half a dozen different radioactive decay dating techniques. Carbon-14 dating. Plus the age of the moon rocks, the age of the solar system, the age of the universe. Now, this is the point. These different ages that scientists infer from the different techniques are not done in one lab or at one conference by one committee that says, hey, look, You know, we got that creationist conference coming up. We got to get our story straight on what our date is. It doesn't work that way. These are different scientists in different fields who go to different conferences and read different journals and don't even know each other. And they all independently come up with the same rough range of dates. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, give or take a couple 100,000 years. The universe is about, Dr. Hovind, it's about 14.5 billion now, we think. And it changes, but it's not changing like between 6,000 years and 20 billion. It's changing between 14, 14.5, maybe 15, maybe 13.5, depending on who's doing the measuring. Now listen, if they all came up with the exact same number, then I would be suspicious that somebody was cooking the data. But they don't. The numbers vary all over the board, but they vary within a range. And the fact that they vary, and yet they're still within that tight range, gives me great confidence that this is correct. Next slide. Another example. Test of evolutionary theory. Early fossils of life should contain only single-cell organisms, and they do. You will not find a single human or any mammalian fossil in a bedding plane that has trilobites. Not one anywhere ever. Why is that? 2, organisms adapted to similar environments should evolve similar morphologies. They do. Whale bodies and fish bodies are all fusiform, designed to cut through the water smoothly. Why is that? Organisms sharing most of their DNA should develop following the same basic patterns. They do. Fossils found in different continents that were once united should be similar to each other. They do. Slide here. So, in my rebuttal, then we'll come back to irreducible complexity. But my point in my opening argument here is that we have answers to these mysteries. Some of them we're very confident in. Others we're less confident in. Others we admit that we're just guessing. We don't know. More data needs to be collected. But even if we're wrong about all of it, it doesn't make the God hypothesis right. And I would caution you, don't hook your faith to any scientific argument, because what are you going to do if it's wrong? Or what are you going to do if it turns out we have an answer? Thank you.
How many lawyers do we have here this evening? Would you stand up? Lawyers? I'm here. I'm sure there's one or two. I love how Michael dismisses the law. Tonight when he gets caught speeding, I hope he says to the officer, "You're talking about the law. I want to talk about the science of motors. It's not going to work."